All right, let's see how the handle assembly goes. So here she is. Now, so what I did was, of course, you see I got the new flip-up caps on there. So this is an older tank. There was a little bit of debris floating around, or not floating, but in the tank that I could see. So I took straight gas, filled it about a quarter way, and then just shook it around, emptied it. But before I did any of that, I dried up the handle from any residue from filling it, and checked along the seam here and along the handle in here, up above here, and then down along here to make sure that there weren't any leaks. So I just did a build of a 288. It had an old handle on it and everything went beautifully. Did its first test run and I discovered that I had leaks here and especially down below on the plastic seam. You can't fix that. So I ended up having to get a new handle assembly, and so I got to go through that whole process again. If I had just tested, filled it with gas after having cleaned the tank, I could have saved myself a little bit of effort there. And yeah, it's unfortunate these tank assemblies aren't cheap, but at any rate, so that's all done. We're prepped and ready to go here. You can see that I've put the handle on the saw already. And I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea for this particular model of saw. We're going to find out here pretty quick. Yeah, so it looks like I'm probably going to have to take, I'm going to have to take the muffler off so that I can mount the handle assembly. So I just discovered that. So I'll be back at you. I'm not going to waste your time with that. When I have the muffler off and I'm ready to install the handle, I'll get back at you. Bowman out. All right. $10mm. All right. Now we're going to need to take off the bracket mounting bolts. Because of the design of this, you have no choice but to slide the whole muffler off. to get at that handle assembly. All right, so we're going to set this aside, and we're going to be very careful now. So I got the muffler off now, and I'm just going to try and leave all that stuff on. Actually, it's going to be a bit of a pain having all of this stuff hanging around while we're working on the handle assembly. All right, so we got the muffler off now. We're ready to start working on the handle assembly. Hopefully we can do this without having to take the handle off the tank. I don't have it securely on there, but just gives me some extra leverage here to maneuver things. Maybe it'll work better to slide it on like this, up and under. I think what I'm going to have to do here if I'm going to make this work with leaving the handle on, is remove the spark plug. It's just poking up a little too far, too high. Set that aside, try not to get it too dirty. Keep it out of the way of other things because it's got anti-seize on the threads. All right, let's try this again. All right. I'm afraid that's just not going to work. Well, never say never. Yep, it is not going to work. So the handle's got to come off first. I'll go ahead and take the handle off and be back at you. All right, we got the handle off. We're ready to do this now. And this is just putting the handle on, or the tank assembly on, is a good example of where it's a good idea to follow the workshop service manual. It indicates to put the actual handle on the tank assembly at a later period, and they were right. Okay. The nice thing about this design for this kind of handle and tank assembly is that it's, I think, a little bit easier to get on than some of the others. So, and that's because of the vertical orientation of the AV mounts. And so before I get things all the way down, it's currently hung up on these back AV mounts, which is good, because what we need to do is get our throttle linkage, the vent, and the fuel line up through the bottom of the tank, and that's a little bit easier when you got some room to work with. So there is a triangle or a rectangular grommet that the throttle cable needs to come up through. And then there is the fuel line. Which is a little more difficult to get up in there. I already had the fuel line grommet installed, but that turns out to not be a very good idea until you get the actual fuel line in the carb box. So we're going to put that on after we get the fuel line up in there. Okay, the fuel line is at least started. Don't know if you can see all of this stuff that I'm up to in here. Now, this little guy, there's a naked hole in the bottom of the car box that the vent hose comes up through. So now that's our next challenge. And that's easier said than done. Might be easier doing it this way. So I realize you can't see much of this, but I guess it gives you an idea of what's involved here, and it's done in real time. So at least you know what the kind of time investment is going to be. So it's a little bit hard getting this vent installed because you gotta press it up through there with the, I've got the bronze, sintered bronze vent is already installed on the vent tube. That makes it a little bit harder to work that hose up through there. So I think I'm going to actually remove that. That makes a little bit of sense to me, just for the standpoint of getting it installed. So I'm just having to work the hose along this sintered bronze plug just enough so I can grab it and work it free. Set it aside. Now we'll try doing this again. And it should be just ever so bit easier now. I'm not trying to force that through there. I'm using a hemostat, and I got to be careful with that because, you know, you don't want to puncture this hose at all or crimp it too much. Well, this is not easy. Trying to capture an edge of it with a small needle nose from up above to try and help pull it through. And that's only going so well here. So I'm going to get that on and be back at you. All right. We got the vent and the fuel line started. Now I got to redo the throttle cable. Okay. Now everything appears to be started. See how that just lowers on there. Before I get too confident that I got her licked, I'm just gonna keep pulling the throttle cable, vent hose, and fuel line up to make sure that I'm not going to have any issues there. Before I forget, I'm going to reinstall this sintered bronze plug, which is part of the vent there. Okay. Now, it's just a matter here of lining up the holes on the AV mounts. I'm just double checking that I don't have anything out of alignment. Everything looks good, so I'm going to drop these bolts in place. Grab a 4mm Allen. And I'm just pushing the spring just ever so slightly till I get the bolt to start. I'm again not going to fully tighten these down initially. I'm just trying to get everything started and aligned. Now we just got the front one left. There we go. Well, these are supposed to be tightened about 5 to 6 Newton meters. Just gonna get all 3 of them hand tight. We're gonna go with 6. Seven, 6. All right. There we go. Now, there's a couple other miscellaneous bolts here that need to be installed. They're in the back, and what they do is they screw in the back of the crankcase, and the tip of it is not threaded, but it fits in between. You may have noticed there were those round openings in the, they kind of look like where an AV mount would go, but there is no AV mounting there. And they're just there, I think, in case the saw moves or vibrates a whole lot. They're kind of acting as a stop. And because they are acting as a stop in those two receptacles, you can't put them on until the tank is in place. Again, those are supposed to be 5 to 6 Newton meters. I'm just going to go ahead and verify that that's what I got. We're good there. So the tank and AV mounts are installed. Now we just got to deal with the hose and the throttle connections. I'm going to take a little flashlight and just verify what's going on with my fuel hoses. Make sure nothing's pinched and crimped in there. So the first thing I'm going to do is try and get this vent hose out of the way. And right here is a connection, or a little bit of a holder for it so that it doesn't flop around in the carb box. And I'm just gonna pop that in there and then maybe push just a little bit of that hose back down towards the tank so that there's a little bit of slack there for vibration. Okay, now I got to get the fuel line onto the stem coming off the carburetor there. Now, I've had fuel in the tank. Things are probably pressurized a little bit. So what I'm going to do is undo the cap so that there's no pressure in it. And that way I shouldn't have to worry about any fuel. And by the way, I did put on a new fuel filter. Okay, so previously I had just plugged that fuel line so I wasn't getting any junk in it during the whole assembly and rebuild process here. So I'm using the old fuel line still. It still has some life in it. It's got a little bit of memory in it, so it was actually pretty easy to get her installed on here again. So we are now have the fuel line installed on the carb. Go ahead and close the cap. And I'm just gonna give it a little bit of, just make sure I got it seated well on there, and it appears to be seated pretty decently. So the only thing left is the throttle cable. Let me bring you in here. So you can see the end of the cable. There's the end of the cable there to the left of that mounting hole for the carb box. And you can see that there's a plastic receptacle for it. I just actuated it. Now let's move you over here and you might see that little plastic receiver for the cable, circular. It mounts through the flange on the carb, and then on the bottom below it to the right you can see another little plastic piece, and that is part of this intake assembly right here. And I have to fit that cable through that little slot and then up through this plastic piece, and the top of that cable will seat right in there. So I may not show you that. Other than, I could probably keep it on here for you so that you at least have an idea of what the real-time investment is on doing it. It's a real pain. Just, there's no two ways about it. They're tight quarters. Okay, so it helped to have a needle nose and a straight edge to get it in the slot below that actuator, and then I just had to move the throttle by hand to get that right here in place. And there seems to be a little bit of tension there. It's not letting it go all the way back to idle, so I can see that the rubber housing on the cable is caught on the grommet, so I'm going to have to figure out how to get that up. But I won't bore you with that. So, tank assembly is on. We'll be back at you in a minute when we start putting the handle on. All right. Let's get the handle back on this sucker. All right, full wrap handle assembled. We do have to mount this spring on here though. That's my bad. Need a little bit of clearance to get this spring in place. It's important to have that top anti-vibe installed. Alright, handle is now installed.